This is our third week. Is that really loud? Kind of echoey in my ear. Does that sound okay? Yeah? Okay, good. Could just be me. And part of going through the book of Revelation is dispelling some of the myths. And last week we talked about, I talked about dispensationalism, and I said it's kind of unhealthy and unhelpful, which I still believe, but what I should have said as well, followed up with, but there are wonderful people who hold to dispensationalism. And I was reminded of that this week. And so, while I still find it unhelpful to the Christian faith, there are many wonderful people who will hold to it. Second thing, as we go through the book of Revelation, this is a book written from a persecuted pastor to a persecuted church. So as we read Revelation, as Canadians in this church culture, this is really an academic exercise because we are not persecuted. I am not persecuted. You are not persecuted. And so, but there are people around the world, there are people in the church through history for whom this book was like a lifeline. And when they held on to this, it was like, man, this is me and this is my story. And so as I preach this, I can only really I can never really get to the heart of it in that sense because it's not my lived experience. And so we're going to do our best by reading stories of other people, by reading stories of people who are. I encourage you to do so. When you're reading, commentaries, even to read commentaries from people around the world who come from the persecuted church, because for them this book hits a little different than it does for us. And so as a white Canadian guy who doesn't really face persecution, I'm going to do my best. But just as we read this, again, it's kind of an academic exercise for us in that sense. Still, obviously, super important. But sometimes you go, I don't know. It's about dragons and stuff. That which is great. We all love books about dragons. But it doesn't hit in quite that same way. Because I'm going to ask you to turn to chapter 12. Because this week we're going to look at what I call Team Dragon. Because again, in the book of Revelation, you only have two teams. You have Team Dragon, you have Team Lamb. And these are the two teams. And the whole point of this book is who are you going to choose? Because Team Dragon, surprise, surprise, not going to make it. Team Lamb's going to make it. But it's up to you. Can't force you to. And so you get to pick. So chapter 12 is kind of like a cosmic picture of what's going to happen. Chapter 13 is more of like kind of the political story of it. And as we're about to read this story, the author John he's drawing on three different stories actually. A lot of this book, he is assuming his audience knows the Old Testament quite well, especially the prophets, but also just like common literature, common stories, common folklore. Because some of the stuff he draws on, he just expects them to know. He expects them to understand what he's talking about. And so as we're about to read this story of a dragon and a woman, there's three stories he's drawing upon. There's the Greek story we talked about already of Python and Apollo. There's the Babylonian story of Tiamat and Marduk. And then there's an Egyptian story of Typhon and Horus. Horus is the son of Isis, the wife of Osiris. Just in case you read the Percy Jackson books and you're like, I know all those names. And so there's these three stories. And different elements from each story, like from the Tiamat story, Tiamat's the seven-headed beast, comes out of the sea. And in their story, a third of the stars are taken from the sky. And that's in this story. In the Egyptian story, it's a red dragon. And it's the mom, Isis, Horus's mom. She's dressed in the sun, right? She's dressed in the sun. And in the Apollo and the Python story, I'm actually kind of blanking on what it was they took. But he takes from all three of these stories because he knows they know these stories. And he knows they understand these stories. And all of these stories, again, are used as ways of talking about how to worship the emperor. They're used as stories how great Roman culture is, how great Egyptian culture, how great Babylonian culture is, which is why he uses these stories. He says, here are stories that are literally propaganda stories about empire. And he takes them and he puts them together and he makes them about the empire of Jesus. And so again, as he reads this, there's a lot of people who they understand. So I just want you, in that 30 seconds, to be one of those people. You now know it all. You are learned. So in chapter 12 of Revelation, it says, Then I witnessed in heaven an event of great significance. I saw a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon beneath her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant, and she cried out because of her labor pains and the agony of giving a birth. Now, as soon as they read that, already they've got all these stories in their head. They're like, I think I know where this is going. Then I witnessed in heaven another significant event. And I saw a large red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns with 7 crowns on his heads. And his tail swept away 1/3 of the stars in the sky, and he threw them to the earth. He stood in front of the woman as she was about to give birth, ready to devour her baby as soon as it was born. And she gave birth to a son who was to rule all nations with an iron rod. And her child was snatched away from the dragon and was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness where God had prepared a place to care for her for 1,260 days. Then there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon and his angels, and the dragon lost the battle, and his angels were forced out of heaven. This great dragon, the ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, the one deceiving the whole world, was thrown down to the earth with all his angels. Then I heard a loud voice shouting across the heavens, "It has come at last, salvation and power in the kingdom of our God, the authority of his Christ. For the accuser of our brothers and sisters has been thrown down to earth, the one who accuses them before our God day and night, and they have defeated him by the blood of the Lamb and by their testimony. And they did not love their lives so much that they were afraid to die. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who live in the heavens rejoice. But terror will come on the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you in great anger, knowing he has little time." And when the dragon realized he had been thrown down to earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. But she was given 2 wings like those of a great eagle, so she could fly to the place prepared for her in the wilderness. And there she would be cared for and protected from the dragon for a time and half a time. And that's coming out of Daniel chapter 7. Then the dragon tried to drown the woman with a flood of water that flowed from his mouth. But the earth helped her by opening its mouth and swallowing the river that gushed out from the mouth of the dragon. And the dragon was angry at the woman and declared war against the rest of her children, all those who keep commandments and maintain their testimony for Jesus. Then the dragon took his stand on the shore beside the sea. Now, those 3 stories are a part of this, but also you have, oh, wait a minute. I don't have my clicky thing up there, Tom. It's still on worship lyrics, which I can go through if you want. But as we look at Team Dragon, so part of it comes from folklore, which they know, but also he expects them to know a lot of the Old Testament. And so in Jeremiah 51, in Jeremiah, the monster of Babylon is shown as a monster swallowing up God's people, but it's literally called God's revenge against Babylon. So there's this thing about, and then you have in Ezekiel 29 and 32, Egypt is this water, this monster that lurks in the water that is trying to destroy God's people. And so the picture of the dragon comes from, of this monster, comes from folklore, but it also comes from the Old Testament. And where do we very first in the Bible, where do we first see the idea of like a dragon? I know you all know it, you're just afraid to say it. Anybody? Genesis? Who shows up in Genesis? There you go. What is a serpent if not a reptile? What is a dragon? Just a really big serpent, right? In the very first story, you have the snake, who's literally an agent of chaos, and then in the Revelation, you have another agent of chaos. This time it's a dragon, and that's not lost on the people. Like as John writes, this is who he has in his mind. This has been going on since the very beginning, because in the very beginning of Genesis 3, you want to click through for me? There's the dragon and the woman. Next one there, Thomas, if you don't mind. That's just Jeremiah. Actually, never came out. He's devoured me, crushed me, set me aside, right? Swallowed me like a monster. And is, again, just showing you. This is all coming out of the OT. This book is so filled with the Old Testament. And the next one, Tom? There we go. Right? In Genesis 3, what happens? When we first see the serpent, we first see the very first kind of agent of chaos, what does God say? He says, listen, there's going to be a war between you. What does he say in Revelation? He goes, there was a war in heaven. There's a war between the dragon and between God's people. And he's just taking it, he's stealing, right? He's not even original, copyright. Come on, right? He's just saying, there will be war, and he will strike your heel. The serpent will strike your heel, but you will crush his head. And this is the story you have in chapter 12. This is the story of Jesus, right? Who comes to snatch away Jesus when he was born? Herod, right? The world. Who is Herod? Herod is the empire. And the empire came and tried to snatch him away, or tried to kill him, but he was snatched away by God. That very short sentence, he was snatched away up to God. That's his birth, his death, his resurrection, and his ascension. And so God takes him. So what does the dragon do? Right? What does the dragon do? The dragon then goes to attack, right? Tries to follow the woman. Who is the woman? Well, the woman is some people say it's Mary, but it's the church. It's the New Jerusalem. It's the people. So he tries to attack the church. The dragon tries to attack the church, and that doesn't work. And when he can't defeat the church, then he goes after the other children, which is who? It's believers. It's you and it's I, right? So he tries to attack Jesus. The empire tries to attack the church, but it can't do that, so now it will attack people on an individual basis. And this is really all his plan. This is all he can do at this point. This is who the dragon is. And who is the dragon from the very beginning? Right? Satan, the accuser, the devil. Whatever you want to call him, he says, this is who the dragon is. And the dragon is behind all of these things. Right? The dragon is behind all of these things. And so, and then go to the next chapter. Right? And what is he saying with, as you turn to chapter 13? Actually, should already be there, right? He's saying behind every Babylon, behind every Rome, behind every evil empire, ultimately, right? It's not the emperor, It's not whatever. It's this person. Oops. Now this one won't work. Good times. Chapter 13. All right, so you have the dragon. This is who he is. He's the one behind everything. He's the one doing these things. You can go to the next one if you want. And it says this. Then I saw a beast rising up out of the sea. And by the way, I don't have a map for you, but Italy's over here. John's on an island here, and all the 7 churches are here. So he says, I saw him rising up out of the sea, right? This is Rome coming up out of the Aegean Sea. It had 7 heads and 10 horns. Again, Rome has seven hills. That's what signifies it is Rome. With 10 crowns on its horn. Written on each one were names that blasphemed God. And the beast looked like a leopard, but it had the feet of a bear and the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave the beast his own power and throne and great authority. And I saw that one of the heads of the beast seemed wounded beyond recovery, but the fatal wound was healed. The world marveled at this miracle and gave allegiance to the beast. They worshipped the dragon for giving the beast such power. They also worshipped the beast. Who is as great as the beast, they exclaimed. Who is able to fight against them? Then the beast was allowed to speak great blasphemies against God. He was given authority to do whatever he wanted for 42 months, and he spoke terrible words of blasphemy against God, slandering his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. And the beast was allowed to wage war against God's holy people, to conquer them. And he was given authority to rule over every tribe and people and language and nation. And all the people who belong to the world worship the beast. They are the ones whose names were not written in the book of life before the world was made, the book that belongs to the Lamb who was slaughtered. So anyone with ears to hear should listen and understand. Anyone who is destined for prison will be taken to prison. Anyone destined to die by the sword will die by the sword. And this means that God's holy people must endure persecution patiently and remain faithful. So we have the first beast coming up out of the sea. He's given the power of the dragon, right? He's got dragon power, but it's not really his power, even though it looks like his power. It's coming from the dragon. Right? And this is what he's all about. And what's his role? What's the role of this beast, this weird-looking thing? You should Google. They have some really funny ones out there. Some people are a lot better at graphics than other people, is what I've discovered. Holy cow. Something we're like, I should use that just to freak everybody out. Yeah. And who is the first beast? The one that comes up out of the sea? It's Rome. So you have behind Rome is the dragon, but this is Rome, and Rome uses its power to force people to worship it. It's all about power. The first beast is all about power. Now there's this whole thing about this wounded head, get wounded, and then I didn't know anything about that. Anybody? You ever wonder about that? You read that and go, that's a random bit, right? I didn't know this, but Nero, he committed suicide, but kind of away from the city. He was running away because Rome had turned on him. So he committed suicide, and he wasn't buried with like other emperors. It was a private little burial. And so after he was buried, it was very private. It wasn't public. There started a rumor that Nero was going to come back. He didn't really die. Classic Elvis move, right? Didn't really die. Elvis is coming back. He is in the building. And this was a worry because Rome turned against him. And so he was going to come back and do what? He was going to take out Rome. And people believed it enough that 3 different imposters rose up and said, I am Nero. And actually, the very last imposter actually got a neighboring kingdom to march against Rome. He actually convinced enough people that he was Nero. And so again, I don't know nothing about this, but every commentator I read all said the same thing. This is the myth of Nero returning. This is the worry. It was wounded, and when they see this Nero coming back, they're like, whoa, this guy died, but he didn't die, and now he's back. And there's this sense of resurrection, right? The whole book of Revelation is a parody of what we have, because we're about to look at the third beast. Right? There's the unholy trinity. You have the dragon, you have the first beast from the sea, and about to look at the second beast from the land. You have the unholy trinity. And so within that, you have this picture of Nero who almost died and came back to life. And so he's definitely parodying this idea. And so this is who we have. There's also, because of Nero, when Domitian came, there was also a worry that he was kind of like a resurrected Nero. He was kind of like the second Nero. And here he comes. Here comes Rome. They're going to start doing what they used to do. But then we go to the second beast in verse 11. Then I saw another beast come up out of the earth. He had 2 horns, like those of a... That's all it says, is 2 horns. So I Googled 2-horned animals, and that came up. It's a good a guess as anybody's. I had a little baby in one with horns, but I thought that's kind of was off the mark. Then I saw another beast come out of the earth. He had 2 horns like those of a lamb. Oh, like a lamb. I should have read that part. But he spoke with the voice of a dragon. I got too excited. I was like, 2 horns. He exercised all the authority of the first beast, and he required all the earth and its people to worship the first beast, whose fatal wound had been healed. He did astounding miracles, even making fire flash down to earth from the sky while everyone was watching. And with all the miracles he was allowed to perform on behalf of the first beast, he deceived all the people who belonged to this world. He ordered the people to make a great statue of the first beast who was fatally wounded and then came back to life. He was then permitted to give life to the statue so it could speak. Then the statue of the beast commanded that anyone refusing to worship it must die. He required everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to be given a mark on the right hand or the forehead. And no one could buy or sell anything without the mark, which was either the name of the beast or the number representing his name. Wisdom is needed here. Let the one with understanding solve the meaning of the number of the beast. For as the number of a man, his number is? Or 616, as we're about to find out. You're like, what? So, first beast is Rome, its power. Second beast is propaganda. The second beast is propaganda. And this is civil leaders, this is religious leaders, this is anyone who props up the myth of Rome, who props up the worship of Rome, who helps with this civil religion of tying Rome together. It's all about propaganda. Right? It's all about propaganda. And it talks about, building this statue and giving it voice. Anybody know what this is? Anybody? I gotta stop looking at Charlie. I always look at you, Charlie. Right? So this is in Germany, but this is a remake of the altar in Pergamum, one of the 7 churches. It's called the Altar of Satan. Right? And it's just this massive, look at the size of this thing. Right? It's like 35 by 35. This is a recreation of it once they excavated it. They call it the altar of Satan, or the seat of Satan, because it's just this huge altar to who? To multiple gods, to empire, and it became a center point for the city and for the areas. That's why he calls it the seat of Satan, because this second beast is what? It's those who encourage people to worship empire. It's those who encourage people to worship the first beast, which is Rome. And so you have power, you have propaganda, you have empire, and you have the religion which props it up. And he says, and he's saying behind all of this is the dragon. But this is what it is, right? And there's a lot of people go, oh, who's the beast going to be, and blah, blah, blah. It's those who propagate, those who build up the empire around it. That's all it is. Right? It's a political and religious collaboration. And to prove that they're working together, it gives you a mark. Now here's the thing. I want you to answer a couple questions for me. Who has ever heard of the mark of the beast? Who has ever heard what the mark of the beast is? Who has gotten an email, a Facebook post, perhaps a fax? I worked at a golf course when fax machines were still working. And literally we got like 1,000 a day. One came through and it was like, don't get this implant. It's the mark of the beast. Anybody? That was a fax. And I was like, this is great. What else you got? Anything else? Anybody else hot? I'm super hot. I mean, I'm warm. I want to hear from you. Growing up, what did you hear was the mark of the beast? Throw it out there. Bank cards. Cell phones, yep. Barcodes. RFID chips. Vaccines, right? Like it was first it was all about an actual implant, right? Like I get stuff all the time. Did you hear in Sweden they're putting something in your hand and you can buy stuff? I'm like, that's amazing. I wouldn't need my wallet, right? Like that. I know I'm a bad person, but I'm like, that would be so simple. That would make life a lot easier. Right? But this one was big. This one was big the last couple of years, right? Oh man, this was a big sticking point for Christians, wasn't it? If you get the vaccine, that's the mark of the beast. I'm like, is it really that easy? Like that was super simple. We figured it out, man. Right? Like that's it. Right? And there was a lot of talk about that, wasn't there? And then it's inside you, and not Steve Jobs, the other guy, Bill Gates, he owns you. And I'm like, Bill Gates has every computer in your home. He already has you. Right? Like, he doesn't need this. Right? But there's a word, the mark of the beast. The word is charagma. And what does it mean? It means imperial stamp on commercial documents or the impressions of the head of the emperor on coins. This is what it means. It's an imperial mark, either on a coin or on commercial stuff. And it says, if you don't have this mark, it says you can't do business. You can't do business. When he's writing to the 7 churches we looked at last week, what is the big problem? He says, if you join the guilds, if you join the trade unions, because you're worshiping Satan, because what they do in those meetings, that's all a part of emperor worship. Don't be a part of that. Which means as Christians, as believers, they had to step outside of the trade unions, outside of the guilds, outside of local economy, and they suffered for it. And he says they're going to get a mark, and if without this mark, you can't take part in the economy. You can't take part in the financial transactions. You can't take part in imperial commercialism. You can't. And this is exactly what he just said to the 7 churches. He goes, it's going to suck. It's going to super suck, but you got to do it. Because what happens at those things, it just props up empire, and you have to make this choice. Right? It's this imperial mark. Every commentator says, it could be, metaphorical, but no, it's going to be a literal thing. And why the hand in the forehead? You know why? Again, this book is a parody, right? It's always a parody. In Deuteronomy 6:8, it says, take the law of the Lord and do what with it? He says, put it on your hands and put it on your foreheads. That's why he says that, right? Because I get these things, just a little guy with like a barcode on his forehead. I'm like, that's not literal. He's saying what God said, put my law on your hand and upon your forehead. That's what he says. The beast says, no, take my law and put it on your hand and put it on your forehead. Don't worry about actual hands and foreheads. We would get that. That would be super easy. We'd be like, hey, there it is. I saw it. It's on your forehead. Right? That's not what it is. It's the thing that allows us to be a part of what's happening in our world that supports the empire, that supports Babylon. This is how it works, right? There's going to be a number. And this is a fun little part, right? Gematria, you guys know that? Like adding up numbers. It can go way wonky if you start doing this stuff. But at the very end, he says, right, you need to understand this, let those with understanding solve the meaning of the number of the beast for his number of 666, right? Some manuscripts, and the earliest ones actually have 616 as well. Doesn't matter, they both add up to Nero. There's not a commentator I haven't read who says this is not Nero. Everybody then knew it was Nero. Every commentator now knows it's Nero. It could represent, just emperors in general, but he's talking about Nero. He's 100% talking about Nero. Because the perfect number of God is 777. So the imperfect number of man is 666. And it's this whole weird, you can add it up and people still do it today. It always comes out to Hitler or Bill Clinton or Nixon and Reagan. And basically every president ever has had 666 if you work it out enough. But it also adds up to the word beast. And so John he literally says, guys, here's a puzzle, you're going to get it. Because get it, and they're all having fun. It's Nero, right? It adds up to Nero, it adds up to beast. He's just saying, this is Nero. Right? This is the guy who persecuted. They're not under Nero at the time of the writing, but they know what he represents. They know who he is. Every imperial figure, right, who appears godly, right, but is truly Antichrist. The word Antichrist isn't in this book, but these are the Antichrist, because you have the dragon, that's the opposite of God. Then you have the first beast, that's the opposite of Christ. Then you have the third beast, and he's the opposite of the Holy Spirit. This is the unholy Trinity, and they are fighting against the Holy Trinity. And here's the thing about the mark of the beast in 666. It's kind of boring. It's actually not that exciting. You go, yeah, it's the imperial worship that allows me to be a part of society and make money, but I have to accommodate some things. I have to kind of give up some of my beliefs to be a part of that. And he says, don't do it. Right? It's not Putin. It's not Kim Jong-un. It's not every American president ever. Right? So as Christians, let's not get distracted with those things and try to figure out who is, what is, where will the mark be. It's anything that we take part in that worships empire over God, right? Over God. And here's the thing, this is the biggest thing where I don't want us, and I encourage you, do not spend your time looking and seeking and trying to speculate. Why? Because then we miss what John is trying to say, which is what? He says, you have wild things, you have beasts. There's the dragon in every single age. Every single age, every single culture, you have these things. Right? In 1 John 2, what does the author say? He says, hey, there's not one Antichrist. He goes, many Antichrists. They're already here. Many have come, and many are here right now. That's how we know it's the end times. I grew up my entire life, who is the Antichrist? John's like, there's tons of them. Everyone who is anti-Christ is an Antichrist. And if it happens to be empire, then that's the one. And for your age, that's the one. Why? Because it's power and propaganda. Because propaganda does what? It seduces us. It invites us to what? To idolize a human empire over God's empire. A human kingdom over God's kingdom. This is what the whole book about. There's only two kingdoms. There's this kingdom and this kingdom. There's Team Lamb, there's Team Dragon. You've got to figure this out. And propaganda says what? It says, listen, war is actually peace and evil is actually good. Can you think of, what comes to mind when you think of propaganda? When you think of empire, when you think of this war, this violence will actually bring about peace and goodness. Well, probably every empire ever, but when you think propaganda, who comes to mind? Yeah. Talk about propaganda. Right. This guy's a champion. This guy's a hero. This guy loves babies. Right? War is good. What we're doing here is good. What we're doing here is good. Now, what was the German church's response to Nazism, to the rise of Hitler? It was mixed. Some churches said, yay, this guy's our savior. It's going to be great. Other people tried to ignore it and stay out of it. Other people said, no, this is terrible. You ever heard of a guy named Martin Niemöller? I'm saying that wrong. Doesn't matter. I don't know. Right? You've heard this before, though, right? This is what he's famous for saying. But he started, as soon as Hitler came out, he started preaching against them. He got arrested real quick. The guy's in prison, and another chaplain who he knows, another priest, comes because he's doing his rounds in the church. He goes, whoa, why are you in prison? And he looks at him and he goes, whoa, why aren't you in prison? Right? Because to him, he goes, why are you not out there fighting against Hitler? Not why am I in prison, why aren't you in prison? How in the world are you not fighting against this propaganda? Because this is such, right, Nazi Germany was such a mix of religion. Churches supported this. They said, this is good. They supported the empire. They saw the evil, and they called it good. They called it good. Any other examples that come to mind? Google cross and American flag. There was millions of hits of the cross and American. I Googled cross and Canadian flag. There was like 3. No, I'm not kidding. I was very proud. That was a very proud Canadian moment. There's about 1 billion of pictures like this. I actually had 3 or 4 in here. I took them out. Like, this stuff is everywhere. There's the American flag with a cross in the middle. There's crosses that are the shape. There's one where there's a cross and there's an American flag flowing in the wind. And you're just like, what is happening? Talk about mixing your empire and your religion. And your religion says we need to support the empire and to be a good Christian, right? I pick on America a lot because I'm Canadian. It's what we do, right? But it actually worries me because who is the most Christian nation in the world, according to the world? It's America. They represent Christ, right? And they talk about the rise of nationalism. The flag draped around the cross, there's nothing, it's almost, not almost, it is. It's sickening. You see this stuff and you go, what is going on? Like you read this book and you're like, oh, who's it? Every nation that does that, if it was Germany, if it was Russia, right now it's America. Some people in America. God and country just go together. They go together. And the worship of God is the worship of nation and the worship of empires. You cannot be a Christian. Like we don't have a Canadian flag in here on purpose. We will never put one in here. Right? We don't worship Canada. We love Canada, great country. God does not care about our borders. We made this country up. All the countries were made up. And they may not be here in 50 years. Who knows? God does not care. Right? I love being Canadian. I love our country. We will not put a flag up in here. We put no one's flag up in here. Because every flag, right? A guy that I know, he was just traveling to the States. He put it on Facebook. He goes, man, it's so weird. He just had photos of American flags. Every house, every business has an American flag. He goes, you just don't see that in Canada. I was like, good. That's good. That's a really good thing. But here's the thing. Here's the thing that we know. It's from 1 John. It says, the Son of God, what did he do? He came to destroy the works of the devil. Which is what? Which is empires. He came to destroy all empires but his own. And I love this picture because in Genesis 3, he says, I put enmity between you. There's going to be war between the woman and the serpent. And I love this photo. I've never seen this photo before, but I think it's such a great photo. Right? This is how it happens. This is how Jesus did. And this is what the book says. He says, listen, there's 2 empires, but I'm going to put it plainly. Only one of them makes it. Only one of these kingdoms makes it, and it's not the dragon. So if you want, I'm going to show you who it is. It's empire. I'm going to let you know. You can choose. But this is what happens at the end. This is what happens at the end. This is where he leaves us, right? This is Team Dragon. It's the dragon, and it's the 2 beasts. It's the unholy trinity. Next week, we're going to look at the other side. We're going to look at Team Lamb. Who makes up Team Lamb? What are they called to? But this is the decision that the church faced and that every single Christian that we face. It's not to look and to speculate about what is the mark of the beast or who is the Antichrist. You know, it's always Russia, by the way. But it's to look for it in our own world and in our own hearts and in our own culture and to recognize it. So we're not sitting looking going, oh yeah, it's there, it's there. Actually, it's right behind us. It's all around us. We're living in it. It's a part of us. And so John's pretty open about this stuff. Right? This is a hard decision. He says it's not going to be easy. You're going to face death. You're going to face persecution. But you need to know it's worth it. You need to know what happens in the end. You need to know how this story finishes and what the kingdom of God will be like. And the rest of the book is that, right? There's a Team Lamb, there's a Team Dragon, and the rest of the book is just how it goes down. We're going to go through that, not next week, but the week after. Look at the 3 cycles of 7 judgments and what that's all about. Lays out in detail how it's going to go down. And so I encourage you to keep coming back the next couple of weeks as we finish through this book. As we go through this book and do our best to dispel some of the myths and to try and help us understand how this actually applies to us here and today. So we may be aware of very much the empire in which we live and work and where it is that we give over our worship over to empire all the time. So let's close the word of prayer and the band's going to come up and lead us in one.